Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at this stack of sources you provided. It's quite a journey, really. Goes from the Gilded Age, the robber barons, all the way up to crypto collapses.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And what we're doing is trying to pull out let's call it the blueprint. Not for innovation, maybe, but for building massive corporate power, often the kind you don't really see.
That's exactly it. The goal today really is to look beneath the surface. We all see the convenience, right? The fast logistics, the global reach, cheap stuff.
Sure.
But we want to expose the mechanics behind it all, how that dominance is actually achieved. And what's fascinating is the company names change over time, but the playbook, it stays remarkably similar.
How so?
Well, it leans heavily on things like, strategic financial moves, getting cozy with politics, and maybe surprisingly, a real tight grip on the people involved, the workers, the whole surrounding ecosystem.
Okay, right. So this architecture of control, we're not just picking on one big company today, are we? We're trying to dissect the DNA of the modern monopoly itself using these examples.
Precisely.
And we've kind of pulled out three big themes that just keep popping up in this material, both old and new, things we really need to get into.
Okay.
First, how is this kind of overwhelming dominance actually set up? Financially, politically, the foundation. Second, this relentless drive for efficiency. What's the human cost? What price is paid for that speed?
Mm-hmm.
And third, the sort of shadow influence, how control works through ecosystems, data, keeping things murky with dark money and all that.
It really is a powerful story when you lay it out like that, because it shows these techniques for getting market control, they're almost timeless. Doesn't matter if you're dealing in railroads or digital data, the basic strategy, leveraging the system, it's pretty much the same game.
All right, let's dive into section 1 then. The anatomy of a monopoly. Starting way back, maybe, the historical roots. American industrial control, when it was all about resources, infrastructure. You kind of have to start with Cornelius Vanderbilt, right? He seems like the prototype.
Vanderbilt's a perfect place to start, because he just got it. Infrastructure is power. Simple as that, really.
Mm-hmm.
He was operating when America was, talking a big game about free markets.
Right, the rhetoric.
Exactly. But his actual business, it was all about strategically crushing anyone who got in his way. Using infrastructure control, financial muscle. The sources show this really clearly with his campaign against guys like Menem Sanford on Long Island Sound. He just went after them.
And the thing that blows my mind is the hypocrisy, the PR spin. He's building this transport monopoly while plastering this aggressive Jacksonian slogan everywhere. Opposition to imposition, no monopoly-free trade and equal rights.
Oh, the irony is thick, isn't it? And that shows you one of the earliest tricks in the monopoly playbook, one that sticks around. Managing public perception is just as vital as controlling the actual tracks or ships.
So you make the other guy look like the bad guy imposing on people?
Precisely. He attacked his competitors using the language of fairness, democratic ideals, even while he was tightening his own grip.
Yeah.
He knew if people saw the other guy as the problem, his own moves looked, justified, or at least less threatening.
Okay. So Vanderbilt sets the stage, infrastructure, plus that populist messaging. But then John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, they really took the financial and logistical side of control to another level, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Standard Oil's methods weren't just about cutting prices. That's too simple. They were systemic, devastatingly so. Rockefeller totally mastered using the railroads, which were, they were the lifeblood of American business back then.
The arteries, yeah.
And the sources point to a system of secret rebates, which is bad enough for competitors, but crucially also drawbacks.
Okay, let's pause on the drawback, because that feels like a key technical bit here.
Right.
A rebate is basically a secret discount for shipping your own stuff. Standard Oil gets cheaper shipping. Huge advantage already.
Right.
But the drawback, what did that do?
The drawback was the knockout punch.
Right.
Rockefeller didn't just get the secret discount for his oil. He also negotiated a deal where Standard Oil got an extra fee, the drawback, based on how much oil his competitors shipped on those same railroads.
Wait, so his rivals ship oil and he gets paid?
Essentially, yes. Think about the insane pressure that puts on rivals. Every single barrel of oil a competitor managed to ship actually put money into Rockefeller's pocket. It instantly created this massive, unbeatable financial gap. The railroads were basically forced to favor Standard Oil, and competitors just couldn't keep up no matter how good they were at actually refining oil.
Wow. That's not just an advantage, it's rigging the system entirely.
It's structural divergence baked right in.
And then, as Standard Oil got bigger, got established, the sources say it changed. It went from being maybe innovative, dynamic, to actively fighting against progress. Once you've got control, the game shifts from growth to defense.
Exactly right. Look at the Seaboard Pipeline Project. This was revolutionary stuff, led by Byron Benson. It threatened to completely bypass the railroads Rockefeller controlled, shatter his whole rebate system.
So a genuine
A
disruption.
massive one.
Yeah.
And Standard Oil's reaction, it wasn't, okay, let's build a better pipeline ourselves. No, it was, as the sources put it, becoming a benighted custodian of the status quo. They immediately went on the defensive, trying to obstruct Benson's project at every turn.
What did they do? The obstruction tactics sound pretty intense.
Oh, they were comprehensive and fast. Standard Oil started buying up the smaller connecting railroad lines that Benson needed to get his pipeline connected to refineries, basically cutting him off if refiners in places like Bradford even thought about using the pipeline.
Yeah.
They even leaned on the pipe manufacturers. Told them, basically, if you sell pipes to Benson's company, you're done doing business with Standard Oil. Ever.
That confirms a key point, doesn't it? The real sign of a monopoly isn't always just high prices for consumers. It's when a company actively, aggressively tries to kill off truly disruptive innovation that threatens its control.
That's a crucial tell. They protect the existing structure above all else.
Now, what's really striking is seeing this same basic playbook using infrastructure, political connections, guaranteeing your cash flow pop up almost identically, but in a totally different context, like with the big Asian tycoons the sources talk about.
Yes, absolutely. In places like Hong Kong, Malaysia, you saw these huge empires getting built on what our sources call cozy colonial commercial stitch-ups. Basically, systems built on elite, backroom deals, not open competition. Deals often greased by the state, designed to guarantee income streams.
Like Kaching getting Hutchison seems like a textbook case of that kind of non-market advantage.
Definitely. He got the company at a low price, wasn't even put out to tender properly, and the scale of the deal. One senior exec apparently said later the breakup value of the company was more than double the amount he paid.
So it wasn't about smart market timing, it was about access. Getting a deal nobody else could get.
It was basically a massive injection of capital and control over infrastructure, secured because of his connections, not because of market forces.
And then you have Robert Kook in Malaysia. Decades of dominance in the sugar industry. How? Based on import quotas, he had an 85% share.
It's the modern equivalent of Rockefeller's railroad rebates, isn't it? You secure your core business not through being better, but through getting the system tilted in your favor. A guaranteed slice of the market.
And that guaranteed cash flow becomes incredibly powerful, especially in a crisis.
That's the kicker. Because Kook had that secure sugar income, when the Asian financial crisis hit in the late 90s, businesses were failing left and right. People were desperate.
Right. Everything was collapsing.
But his core cash stream was safe. Untouchable, really, because it was protected by state policy. So while everyone else was forced to sell assets cheap just to survive, he was sitting there with cash, ready to buy. He could snap up valuable assets at bargain prices, massively accelerating his own wealth precisely because his foundation was artificially protected. Hashtag take Funtex 1.2, state complicity and financial hijacking.
Which leads us right into this whole idea of state complicity, where political connections basically turn government programs, things meant maybe for public good or development, into ways for the elite to just get richer. Godfather economics, as the sources call it.
Yeah, that term really captures it. The sources show how these big, ambitious programs, things like import substitution, industrialization, ISI.
Yeah. The idea was to build up local industries, stop relying on imports. Sounds good on paper.
Sounds great. But in practice, in places like the Philippines, Indonesia, the whole process got hijacked by the powerful elites who were already there. The benefits didn't flow where they were supposed to.
How did that work? Like, the Indonesian Benteng program, it was meant to help indigenous traders, right? But the source says it ended up creating not an indigenous merchant bourgeoisie, but a group of licensed brokers and political fixers. What happened?
It's a classic example of rent-seeking. Instead of helping people actually make things, the government made the license to import or trade the really valuable thing. So you didn't get innovative businesses springing up.
You got middlemen.
Exactly. You got a class of political insiders whose main skill was getting those licenses. Then they could just sell them on or use them to get leverage. The actual small manufacturers, the ones who needed help, they often got tangled up in red tape, couldn't get credit. Meanwhile, to connect the guys with the licenses cleaned up, it completely failed to build a real industrial base, just enriched the usual suspects.
And you see the same pattern with essential stuff like power generation, the independent power producer contracts, the IPPs in Malaysia.
Oh, the IPP deals are a stark example of how risk gets pushed onto the public. These contracts were just handed out, no open bidding, to the, quote, big godfathers.
The politically connected players.
Right. And not only did they get the contracts guaranteed, they often got to run their power plants using subsidized natural gas from Petronas, the state oil company. So their fuel costs were artificially low.
Okay, so cheap inputs.
And then the state-owned utility company, Tenaga, was forced by the government to buy all the electricity they produced, usually at a preset favorable price.
Wow. So low cost guaranteed, sales guaranteed, price guaranteed. That sounds like, well, zero risk. A license to print money, basically.
That's exactly what it was. It created this continuous, high-profit, totally risk-free cash flow for the tycoons involved, like Francis Yeo, who's mentioned. But who pays for it in the end?
The public, presumably,
Right.
through higher electricity bills or maybe the state bailing things out later.
Right. The cost of enriching these elites gets spread across the whole population. Higher prices, maybe less money for schools or hospitals because the state is propping up these deals. It directly fuels poverty and inequality.
You know, this concentration of guaranteed returns, returns that aren't really connected to market risk or innovation. It sounds exactly like what Thomas Piketty was talking about when he looked at why the very richest fortunes grow so much faster than everyone else's.
It really is the mechanism in action. Piketty observed that the biggest fortunes consistently grow at these really high rates, maybe 6–7% a year, year after year, much faster than average wealth grows.
And part of that is just having huge amounts lets you manage it better, take long-term risks.
Sure, there are genuine economies of scale in managing massive portfolios, access to better advice, ability to be patient, but these political and systemic advantages we've been discussing, the secret rebates, the protected quotas, the subsidized IPP contracts, they're just another form, maybe a more blatant form, of getting those supercharged returns, returns that aren't available to ordinary people or businesses.
So it's not just that the system allows them to get richer. It's actively structured to make sure their capital grows way faster than anyone else's. It locks in that dominance generation after generation.
That's the inescapable conclusion, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Man. Okay, so we've seen how the financial fortress gets built. Now we need to shift focus a bit, look inside the machine. How does this relentless push for, exponential efficiency actually get enforced internally? And what's the human toll? What does it cost the people working inside these systems?
Right. This is where the corporate culture becomes part of the blueprint. And the early tech giants are a key place to look. Our sources really point to early Microsoft as, a pretty brutal case study. This intense, high-pressure world built completely around speed and efficiency above almost everything else.
Yeah, Microsoft's early motto, we set the standard. It drove them, no doubt, pushed them to dominate the market. But it also created this internal environment where being first often mattered more than being right or building something solid. Led to unrealistic deadlines, missed targets, sometimes pretty flawed products hitting the market.
And the sources paint a picture of a really tough internal culture, too. Competitive, aggressive.
Deeply competitive. And maybe a bit paranoid. But the psychological impact seems huge. The drive to meet these standards, the pressure from the top, it took a toll.
And Bill Gates himself kind of set the tone, didn't he, with his communication style. These blunt, sometimes really harsh emails, flame mail, they called it internally,
Right.
often fired off at like 2 a.m, picking apart code, criticizing decisions.
That kind of behavior from the top sets a really powerful expectation, doesn't it? It wasn't just feedback. It felt like constant scrutiny, almost surveillance. It created this culture of total commitment where you felt you had to be on all the time.
Yeah, the sources have these anecdotes about programmer burnout, people literally wondering if they could ever work again after leaving.
And that pressure to show commitment. It wasn't enough to just do your job well. You had to be seen doing it. The source mentions a programmer bragging he'd been at the office for 12 hours. That signals that pure hours logged, that visible effort, was valued, maybe even over smart, efficient work. That leads straight to burnout.
And this kind of top-down dictatorial style where efficiency is demanded by one leader whose word is law. It wasn't just early tech, right? It reminds me of figures like Robert Maxwell, the publishing guy.
Maxwell is another great example of enforcing control through sheer force of personality,
Hmm.
not just structure. There's that famous story where he's facing an angry crowd, maybe shareholders or employees, I forget,
Yeah.
and he just yells at them, basically, I've put 90 million pounds into this. I'm not running a charity. I am the proprietor. I am the boss, and I want that understood. It's that absolute singular authority. It crushes dissent, shuts down debate, doesn't allow for realistic feedback. Only the boss's vision matters, even if, like with Maxwell's encyclopedia business later, that vision is wildly unrealistic or reckless. Hashtag tag 2.2, suppressing labor and avoiding regulation.
Okay, so this ruthless focus on speed, efficiency, dictated from the top, it naturally translates into how the company operates day to day, right? Especially policies designed to keep labor costs down, keep workers from having too much power, and avoid getting bogged down by internal rules or constraints. We see that really clearly with some of the modern disruptor companies.
Oh, absolutely. Uber is a fascinating modern example of building structural ruthlessness right into the model, especially around labor. The sources say the company was actively trying not to become like, say, Cisco, what they saw as a bloated behemoth, slowed down by layers of management and bureaucracy.
They wanted to stay lean and fast.
Exactly.
Wow.
Maximum operational flexibility. And one way they did that was by deliberately minimizing traditional bureaucracy,
Yeah.
especially HR human resources. They kept that function really limited.
So if HR wasn't there for the usual stuff, employee support, development, retention, what was it for at Uber, according to the sources?
It was seen almost purely transactionally. Its job was basically get new people in the door, fast onboarding, and get rid of bad hires just as quickly. That was it. It wasn't set up for coaching managers or helping employees navigate issues or anything that might, empower the workforce or slow down that super fast, high turnover model they relied on.
And then when the workers, or crucially the drivers in Uber's case, because they fought hard against classifying them as employees,
Right, the classification was key.
when they tried to organize, to form unions, that structural ruthlessness really showed itself.
It kicked right in. The sources talk about Uber deploying these pretty aggressive campaigns specifically to stop drivers from unionizing. It makes perfect sense from their operational perspective. They need maximum flexibility, minimum cost. They simply couldn't afford to be tied down by collective bargaining or the regulations that come with having a traditional employee workforce. Fighting unions wasn't just a side issue, it was defending the core efficiency model itself.
It feels like it's about eliminating anything that slows down the machine, doesn't it? No matter if it seems fair or ethical or even potentially valuable in the long run, if it slows down volume, it's out. It actually reminds me of that historical pattern with other builders who chose scale over, say, quality or elegance.
You see that exact calculation with Ray Kroc at McDonald's. The sources mentioned he tried out some slightly fancier, maybe higher quality concepts early on, like a place called Ramon's and the Jane Dobbins pie tree chain.
Right, I remember reading that. They didn't last long.
No, because Kroc found that trying to maintain higher quality in those smaller volume settings just killed the profit margin. It was, as he apparently put it, thin as the skin on a hot dog.
So he ditched them fast.
Immediately cut his losses. And the lesson Kroc learned, the one that these modern giants seem to internalize, is that if you want massive volume, exponential profit growth, you need a certain kind of ruthlessness. You have to be willing to cut anything, whether it's a nice restaurant idea or employees asking for better conditions, or even just internal red tape, anything that complicates or slows down that standardized high-volume system. It either has to adapt to our system, as Kroc said, or it gets thrown out.
Okay, let's move into our third final theme here. This is about how these really powerful companies extend their control, not just over their workers, but out into the digital world, into politics, creating this infrastructure, this ecosystem that becomes harder and harder for society to regulate or even for individuals to opt out of. Hashtag tag 3.1, controlling the digital ecosystem.
Right. And big tech is the obvious place to look for this domination strategy, as the sources call it. Building an ecosystem designed to basically absorb or neutralize anything that could possibly threaten the core business, the core network effect. Facebook is, well, maybe the ultimate example.
Mark Zuckerberg's motto, wasn't it? Domination. That kind of sets the tone right there. And the philosophy behind it was almost existential. If we don't create the thing that kills Facebook, someone else will.
Yeah, it's not just about competing in the market. It's like operating on a permanent war footing against anything that might chip away at their main asset, which is basically user time and attention on their platform.
And Instagram was seen as a huge threat, right, to Facebook's core network.
A massive, immediate threat. which is why Facebook didn't just buy it. They moved to tightly control its operations. The sources say Facebook leadership managed Instagram's headcount, its strategy, almost obsessively, to the point where apparently some Facebook staff were confused, asking things like, has Mark forgotten he owns Instagram?
Yeah.
Because he seems so focused on analyzing its usage data as if it were still a competitor threatening his original baby.
And it wasn't just about ownership or strategy, was it? Facebook actively pushed its own internal culture onto Instagram after buying it, like cultural engineering.
Exactly. That whole tech obsession with measurement, quantifying everything, every click, every reaction, every second spent, that got injected hard into Instagram. And the sources argue it fundamentally changed how people used it, how they communicated.
How so?
Well, the argument is that this focus on metrics, on performance, made communication more strategic, more self-conscious and performative. You start thinking about your posts differently, about engagement rates. The need for growth, for relevance, driven by the platform's data, becomes this constant drumbeat of modern life online. It blurs that line between just being a person and managing your personal brand.
And this constant push for more engagement, deeper user exposure, that led directly to problems, didn't it? That recurring pattern of privacy scandals, newsfeed originally, the Beacon disaster, changing terms of service.
Yeah, it happened again and again. In pretty much every case, Facebook pushed the boundaries on user data, on exposure, arguably too far. Driven by this internal belief that they had to move fast, break things, and basically society's norms would just have to catch up to their uncompromising environment.
Beacon was particularly bad, wasn't it? Sharing people's shopping habits with their friends without clear consent.
Beacon was a huge misstep because it really did misuse private data, exposing people's off-Facebook activities to their network without them fully understanding or agreeing. And even when it was clear the system was violating Zuckerberg's own stated principles about user control, apparently he stayed silent for weeks. It shows this pattern. Prioritize engagement, prioritize data collection, even over user trust, and rely on being too big to fail, basically, to ride out the criticism each time. Hashtag 3.2, political leverage and opacity of funds.
Okay, so from controlling the digital space to trying to control the political space, the sources get into some pretty shocking detail here about how massive wealth gets used to shape policy, often using these intentionally murky funding channels. Dark money.
Yeah, the Koch family foundations are presented as a really interesting high-level case study in this, specifically their funding of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. What one of the readings found was this confidential internal study that basically described Mercatus as, and this is a quote, a lobbying group disguised as a disinterested academic program.
Wow. So it looks like independent research, but it's really pushing an agenda.
That's the allegation in the source, yeah. And the financial setup was clever, too.
How so? Beyond just influence.
Well, the structure apparently gave Charles Koch a double win. He got a significant tax deduction for his donations because it's going to a university center. Looks like philanthropy. But the study suggested that, for all practical purposes, this center served as a really effective lobbying arm for his business interests. It's a way to use the cover of academia and charity to push a specific corporate and political agenda while also shielding that money from progressive taxes.
And this whole issue of opaque funding just exploded after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010, right? The sources say it opened the floodgates.
Absolutely. That decision basically gave these political spending groups the green light to spend unlimited amounts of money without having to disclose who their donors were, anonymously, which led, as one former congressman quoted in the source put it, to no accountability, zero. It meant powerful interests, including the polluters, as the source mentions, could just pour money into influencing elections and public opinion without anyone knowing where it came from.
It's hard to fight back if you don't even know who you're fighting against.
Exactly.
And we even see a weird modern twist on this deliberate opacity with the FTX founder, Sam Bankman-Fried. He apparently felt he had to hide his political donations, his attempts to change the world.
Yeah, Bankman-Fried's political giving was described as really complex, often intentionally hard to track. He claimed he did this because politicians and advocacy groups felt uncomfortable taking money that was visibly linked to crypto, which many associated with shady finance or instability.
So the money was maybe toxic,
Yeah.
reputationally.
That seemed to be the concern. And this led to these strange workarounds, like apparently using his brother, Gabe, as a front, a proxy funding source for one of the advocacy groups he supported. It just shows another tactic in the playbook. If the source of your influence makes people uneasy, just find ways to mask it. Obscure the trail. Hashtag 3.3. Corporate accountability and regulatory evasion.
Okay, finally. Let's talk about the flip side. Sometimes these huge, seemingly all-powerful companies can actually be surprisingly fragile or have shocking gaps in control internally, things hidden by the sheer size or the profitability of the main business. FTX collapsing is just a masterclass in this, isn't it?
Oh, it was an unbelievable failure of basic governance, basic responsibility. Even though the core business, the FTX exchange itself, was apparently making huge profits like 40–50% margin.
Sounds great on paper.
Right. But when investigators finally untangled the mess, the scale of mismanagement was just breathtaking. The single biggest liability they found. Over $10 billion belonging to customers, their deposits, had somehow ended up inside Sam Bankman-Fried's private trading fund, Alameda Research.
$10 billion of customer money.
Yeah, more than all their other debts combined. It's just a stunning breach of trust, and it proves that massive scale and high profits absolutely do not guarantee sound financial controls or ethical behavior on the inside.
And this problem of oversight, of regulation failing to keep up, it's not just a U.S. thing, is it? It feels like a global issue. The sources use the example of the arms trafficker, Victor Bout.
Bout's story is fascinating in this context. They called him the Bill Gates of arms trafficking because his logistics network was so sophisticated. And he apparently showed just how easily powerful transnational operations can dodge sanctions, when regulators in one country would finally catch up and sanction one of his companies.
Yeah. What would he do?
He'd just dissolve it and instantly create new ones, constantly changing company names, setting up new shell firms in different jurisdictions whenever one got outed or targeted. He was incredibly nimble. And it highlights how fragmented and often slow global regulation is. It struggles to keep pace with actors, whether corporate or criminal, who can move money and operations across borders so fluidly.
Okay, so let's tie this back to the beginning, to the financial structures we talked about in Section 1. All these tactics, the state capture, the regulatory evasion, the opaque funding, they ultimately seem to create legal and financial systems that favor the concentration of wealth right at the very top, right? Leading to things like regressive tax systems.
That's the end result we see in the data, yeah. The sources point to places like France, a developed nation. When you look at the total tax burden, not just income tax, but sales taxes, Social Security contributions, everything.
The overall percentage people actually pay.
Right. It turns out to be incredibly regressive at the very top end. The bottom 50% of earners might pay an overall rate of, say, 40 to 45% of their income in total taxes. But the top 0.1%, the super rich, their overall rate is actually lower, maybe around 35%.
How does that even happen? Don't we have progressive income taxes?
We do, but the key is capital income. That clear regressivity happens mostly because large amounts of income derived from capital, from investments, dividends, selling assets often escape the highest progressive tax rates. Since the ultra-wealthy get most of their income from their capital, not from a salary.
They pay a lower overall rate than someone earning a high salary.
Exactly. Their wealth comes from wealth itself, which is taxed differently, often more lightly, than income from labor. So the system, as it's currently structured in many places, ends up protecting and even enhancing the very largest fortunes. It completes that whole cycle of divergence we started talking about, the one that began with things like secret railroad rebates and state-subsidized contracts way back when. #tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive, pulling together all these different threads, it really shows that whether you're looking at, railroad barons manipulating rebates and using populist slogans back in the 1800s, or tech giants controlling digital ecosystems and using dark money today, the basic moves, the underlying mechanics for getting and keeping extreme corporate power, they're remarkably consistent, highly structured.
Yeah, they really are. It always seems to come back to a few key things. Leveraging those political connections, turning public resources into private profit streams, relentlessly pushing for opacity, keeping finances secret, keeping labor conditions under wraps, and driving that efficiency with a kind of ruthless focus that often disregards the human cost or even the long-term health of the system itself.
And the convenience we get, the cheap goods, the fast delivery, it's undeniable, but it's clearly built on this hidden structure, a cost that's paid somewhere else by workers, by smaller competitors, maybe by the integrity of the market or even our democracy.
Absolutely. That convenience has a price, and it's often hidden from view.
So understanding this blueprint, this timeless playbook, feels really essential. It's easy to get distracted by the shiny new product or the, charismatic CEO figurehead. But the real lasting power seems to lie in the infrastructure they build, financial, political, technological, and the systems they learn to manipulate, often way below the surface.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on. We saw how entrenched power, like Rockefeller Standard Oil, actively fought against genuinely disruptive progress, like that seaboard pipeline, simply because it threatened their existing control structure.
Right.
So the question is, what crucial innovation today? Maybe it's technological, maybe it's a social change, maybe it's a needed political reform. What's being quietly suffocated or blocked by a modern corporate empire simply because it doesn't fit their established, highly profitable system, their version of the everything store? We've seen the playbook now. The challenge, spotting the resistance it creates.